yard.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man, or something looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
All right, good evening, folks. Had a little technical difficulty there at the beginning. Of course, there's another part of my streaming software that stopped working. I guess they're updating things in it or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so I have a different show, a good show, but a different show for y'all tonight. We're going to have another reading by Dee Dee. And tonight it is going to be a bit of a long one. It's going to be about 10 minutes long, or not 10 minutes, 15 minutes long. And this is going to be about some a group of Genoskwa that attacked a man and tried to eat him. So because it's going to be 50 minutes long, I'm just going to go ahead and get into it as soon as I can find the thing. And here we go. You'll enjoy.
Hi everyone, this is Dee Dee sharing another encounter with you from the internet. This one's a little long, so I invite everyone to pull up a stump, join me around the campfire as I read from No Sleep. Adam Without Fear posted "The Darkness Smiled," and it goes like this. I was 19 years old when we went into the woods. I had been working at the plant for a little over a year, long enough to get used to the old bastard's jokes and to start busting a few chops of it into the woods for a minute. It was quiet and chilly as we were staring. Most of the trees had been reduced to skeletons this early November weekend, and we had to step carefully as to not crunch the new fallen leaves. "All right," Tom murmured. He spoke softly now. "You know where you're going, Dutch?" "I'm going to try to find my usual spot down in the valley," Dutch said, matching Tom's tone. "If that's okay." "Have at it," Tom said. "I'm taking the kid up the hill." Dutch broke off to the right and snaked into the trees. Tom led me to the left and deeper into the woods. It didn't take long for us to come up to the bottom of a steep hill. The grade shot upward so abruptly that it was more like a wall of earth than a hill. We walked along the bottom for a while until the trees thinned out enough for me to make out a path heading to the top. "All right, kid," Tom said. He was whispering now. Each word came out with a small puff of mist. "I've been coming here with Mackie since I was your age, and he was mine. And I can say that the top of this hill is the best hunting spot on the property. And best of all, none of those other bastards know about it, 'cause they're all too old or too fat to climb the hill, or both. So it's our little secret. Now, there's a lot of deer up here, so we're going to split. Walk down here another 50 yards, and then we'll meet up at the same time." "Is there another trail down here?" I asked. "Nope." "Then why don't you go down there and let me follow the trail up?" "I'm too old and too fat," he said with a chuckle. "That's for sure. Piss off." He gave me one of those buddy punches on the shoulder. "Watch your step going up and keep your eyes peeled." "How can I watch my step and watch for deer at the same time?" "You'll figure it out, smartass." I walked a few steps down when he called after me. "Remember," he said, "if something runs between us, don't shoot me." I rolled my eyes and walked on. I traced the hill until about where he told me to go and started to climb. True to word, there was no path going up. I could walk for a little way, keeping my balance by leaning forward and carefully stepping over the logs and rocks. After a short distance, the grade got too steep and I had to start pulling myself up. About halfway up, I grabbed a sapling and it snapped in my hand. I skidded a foot or two backward with my boots dragging through the leaves. It jogged my gun strap from its position. The rifle swung loose, the barrel clacking against the rock. I winced at the thought of an accidental trigger bump, then steadied myself and pulled the gun back into place. A few feet up was a massive tree. It was higher than even the trees at the top of the hill. Its trunk was as thick as a small car. It stretched above me like a wooden skyscraper. The earth below it had been eroded, exposing a mangled coif of roots, almost as long as I was tall. It looked like a pretty good ladder, so I reared back and sprang upward like an insect. I made it close to my target, but not quite, and planted my face into the dirt with a thud. Tom bellowed from deeper in the woods. "For Pete's sake, kid, quit making me laugh. You're spoiling the hunting." I gave him the finger without looking in his direction, then picked myself up again. At that moment, a small object in the leaves caught my attention. I thought at first it was a spent bullet casing, or maybe a discarded flashlight battery. I unburied it from the foliage and found it to be neither. It was a stone cylinder, about 2 inches long and half an inch in diameter. The ends were flat and smooth, while the circumference was covered with grooves. I held it up, turning it over in my hand, and quickly realized that the grooves made a shape. This tiny piece was stone and had been expertly carved into the shape of a crude humanoid with a garish, angry face, similar to a Hawaiian tiki statue. "Kid, you okay?" Tom's voice snapped me out of it. I gave him thumbs up, stuffed the little sculpture in my back pocket, and reached for the roots hanging under the tree. No sooner had I pulled myself up, then came the second big surprise of the evening. Now that I was eye level with it, I could tell that the space under the tree was hollow. There was a deep black pit extending at least 2 feet into the hole in the side of the hill. The roots dangled in front of it like a curtain. I couldn't tell how deep it was exactly, as it gave way to inky blackness after only a couple inches. It was too small for me to fit in, but a smaller man could maybe crawl on his hands and knees, and a child could walk right through it. I considered sticking my hand inside, then thought better of it. After all, a cave like this was prime real estate for a mother fox. I decided not to think about it too much and finished my journey to the top of the hill. Tom met me, and we started our hunting for the night. He set me up at the intersection of the walking trail and the deer runway. The sun was already low in the sky before we even sat down, and the 45 minutes of watch time weren't enough for a successful night. Tom picked me up soon afterward, and we slunk back through the woods toward camp. He let me use the trail to get back down the hill this time. Dutch didn't get back for a while after we did. He lumbered through the door with a droopy look on his already droopy face. "See anything?" asked Tom. "Not on watch, but there were an awful lot of animals in the woods as I was coming back." "There's always animals in the woods," Mackie said. "That's where they live." The camp laughed. "It's them coons," said Mackie's nephew. "They're awful up here this time of year." Dutch shrugged and went back to his cot in the corner of the cabin. He sat by himself for the rest of the night, reading a book or something, and when everyone else went to bed later, we were surprised to find him fast asleep already. The rest of the guys spent the evening cracking jokes and telling stories. I mostly kept quiet, except when somebody opened themselves up to a ball breaking. The first old man decided to hit the hay at a little after 9, and the rest followed suit like dominoes. They had to get up early to hunt, they said. The fact that they collectively had a buzz to rival a hornet's nest probably didn't help matters. I was nowhere close to tired, but I didn't want to be the odd one out, so I wiggled myself into my sleeping bag on the floor and shut my eyes. Everybody else was asleep on a cot. They stuck me on the floor because I was the greenhorn. Bastards. Soon after the lights went out, the cabin shook with the most horrific sound I had ever heard. It was the hellish snarl of an ancient Cerberus whose contempt for humanity was rivaled only by its lust for the flesh of its prey. This blasphemous growl lasted an eternity before abruptly being replaced by a hissing tempest that threatened to level the entire building. The wind again gave way to that abominable growl, and in that moment I knew the nightmarish plight that plagued Mackie's poor wife. I considered slipping in some shooter's earplugs. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, one of the other guys joined Mackie snoring. Then another and another. And soon the entire camp rumbled with the sound of a bunch of stuffy-nosed pigs caught in a windstorm. I got up, slid on my outdoor clothes, bunched up my sleeping bag, and crept out to sleep in the truck. The night was frosty, but bundled up, at least I had a chance of catching some Z's. which was more than I'd have to say in that noisy cabin. As I settled back in the seat of Mackie's pickup, I felt the little stone carving in my back pocket. I pulled it out, not an easy task in a sleeping bag, I might say, and examined it in the faint moonlight coming through the truck's window. It was such a weird thing to wrap my head around. How would a little grotesque goblin figurine end up where it did? I stroked it with my fingers, scratched at it with my nail, and tapped it against the door handle of the truck. It was definitely stone. None of my amateur geology tests gave me any evidence to suggest that it was anything other than an expertly carved rock. I put it away and tried to go to sleep, but the cold air and lumpy seat made that a hard task. Every so often I would take it out again and look it over, wondering where it had come from. There was no way it was natural. The shape was too polished, the carving too deliberate. The best origin I could think of was that it came from a gift shop. It looked like something off an old Indian totem pole, and there were a fair number of places around here with native words in the name. There had to be an Indian-themed souvenir shop somewhere nearby. Somebody bought it there and stuffed it in their pocket, and when they were walking along the top of that hill, it had fallen out and bounced down into the leaves. The only problem was that Mackie's nephew insisted that nobody had been on the property in at least 2 weeks. If the little stone bauble had been laying there any longer than that, it would have been dirty, if not lost to the elements. The only possibility that made sense was that it had come from some wayward trespasser, and given how far the property was from any other camps, that was an awfully big coincidence. Around the 4th or 5th time I tried to fall asleep, I heard a snap and some rustling leaves outside of the truck on the opposite side from the cabin. I got up on my elbows and peeked out of the window. By the back corner of the shed was a pair of glowing white eyes just a couple feet off the ground. A raccoon, I thought, though not confidently. These eyes were huge, ovular orbs with no pupils. They looked like glowing eggs and would have to be close to the same size to be so large from this distance. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed another pair back and to the right of the first. They too were staring straight into camp, almost looking at me. What animal could have eyes that large and still be that close to the ground? Not a raccoon, maybe a bear cub? A quick movement from the other end of camp caught my attention. I craned my neck to see. Almost pressing my face against the glass, a third set of eyes peeked out from behind the outhouse. I laid my head back down on the seat of the truck and started to stare at the ceiling. I hoped I didn't have to use the bathroom that night. The alarm on my phone woke me up a little after 6. I got up and made my way back into the cabin, being extra careful to keep an eye out for bears along the way. It was still dark but lighter than the dead of night, and I saw no sign of any animal lurking nearby. Half of the guys in the cabin were still asleep, while the other half was lumbering their way through breakfast. They were all surprised when I walked in. None of them even noticed that I was gone. After some light ball breaking, I opted to go into the woods with Tom. He brought me up to the same hill and let me use the path this time. In truth, I was a little disappointed. I half wanted to check out the spot on the hill where I'd found my little stone statue. The hunting that morning was another bust. My legs were already cramped and stuffed before it was even fully laid out. I could barely stay still. There was no chance of a deer coming out to a wiggle worm. So about an hour after daybreak, I shot Tom a text message and started moseying back toward camp. I slowed down when I started to come up to the giant tree from the day before. It was a monster of a plant, easily dwarfing any other tree on the property. The peak of its branches hung over the woods like the king of the forest, and a single cross-section of its trunk could have kept the fireplace burning for days. I had dug up my stone carving just below where its roots hung over the little crater. I had nothing better to do anyway, so for curiosity's sake, I decided to climb down and investigate. I used a couple saplings to help me scale down the side of an embankment before switching the rope-like roots that dangled out of the behemoth oak. I lowered myself into the lee of the overhang until I was face to face with the same dirt I'd kissed the day before, and started to dig around in the old leaves. I found a couple plain Jane rocks, but they weren't worth anything more than target practice at a sapling a little farther down. Right as I started to leave, I heard a high-pitched noise somewhere near my head. It sounded like the chirp of a bird distorted through some kind of audio equipment. It was very close, yet muffled. I turned my ear toward the source and stood completely still. The morning was quiet. I stayed like that for a minute or two and decided I must be hearing things. I moved to climb back down and immediately heard it again. This time I knew that it came from inside the hollow under this tree. Without giving it any thought, I pulled myself up the long root that dangled over the tunnel and eased them out the way with the back of my hand. I peered into the dark maw and froze. Staring at me from several feet back was a set of the same eyes I'd seen the night before. The rest of the cave was blacker than night. The elliptical orbs hung in the void like two lonely moons drifting across a starless night sky. For a brief moment, all my thoughts and feelings vanished. The shock of the sight had basically killed me alive. When I started to think again, a few seconds later, another horrifying thought came over me. If this really was a baby bear, I was staring it down from the mouth of its den, and its mother had to be nearby. I let go of the dangling roots and slowly climbed down the hill. The instant I hit level ground, I unslung my rifle from my shoulder and marched back to camp as quickly as I could without running, eyes scanning for black fur the entire time. A couple of the other guys were already back at the camp, or maybe they had never bothered to leave at all. About 15 minutes later, Mackie moseyed back, and the ribbing started all over again. He dug out a coffee pot and stuck it in the wood stove. We shot the breeze for a few minutes until the coffee finished brewing and Mackie poured us each a cup. It was darker than the hole under the tree, and even with some cream and sugar, it bludgeoned my taste buds like a meteor. The front door cracked open, and Tom stepped inside. "Cold one out today, boys," Tom said as he put his rifle back in its case and started to peel off some layers. "It's that time of year," said Mackie. "You want some coffee?" Tom raised his eyebrows. "Depends. Is it real coffee, or did you just melt the tires off your truck?" "Don't be a wuss. Even the kid likes it, right, kid?" I looked back and forth between them like a puppy that'd been caught plundering in the kitchen garbage. Tom laughed toward the ceiling. Mackie rolled his eyes, but I could see a smirk crossing his mouth. "Dump that crap out, kid," Tom said. "We'll go get some in town. I wanted to pick up a couple things at the grocery store anyway. Mackie, toss me your keys." Tom and I hopped into Mackie's pickup and started through the woods. We made a little small talk about the morning's hunt. I didn't tell him about the tree or the eyes, just being jittery in the cold. He cranked the truck's heater, but by the time it started blowing warm air, we were already rolling past an old wooden sign that said, "Welcome to Forestport." We pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store and went inside. It was small but packed, with far more goods than you might expect. A holdover from the days where you might need a full outfitter. Living so far into the middle of nowhere, a middle-aged woman behind the counter greeted us as we came in. She seemed far too perky for being at work this early in the morning. The other person in the store was an old man sitting in a booth with a newspaper. Tom waved to the woman, then walked to the back of the store while I made my way to the coffee counter. The woman shuffled over and smiled at me. "Fresh pot, just made it." "Smells good," I said. It didn't really, but compared to the sludge that Mackie tried to give me, it wasn't bad. "You boys passing through?" "Doing some hunting. Staying at a camp outside of town for a couple of days." I stirred some cream and sugar into my coffee and took a sip. It was a little hotter than I expected, but it was a nice contrast to the biting cold. "Oh, whereabouts?" I tried to explain it to her as best I could. I barely knew the answer myself. I had just been dragged over the river and through the woods and past the end of the world by a crew of old rednecks. As I tried to tell her where I thought we were, it crossed my mind that if something happened back there, I might not be able to find my way in or out of camp by myself. She sort of nodded and asked a couple questions that I could only half-assedly answer. "Oh, I didn't even know you could get back there," she said after a minute. "Yeah, it's pretty remote, but it's good hunting," I said. "Best be careful out there at night. That's drawboy country." We both turned around. The old man in the booth had lowered his newspaper and was staring right at us. We both hesitated for a moment until the lady answered, "The hell are you on about, Fred?" I said, "That's drawboy country. You gotta watch your step." He stared straight at me. His face was lined with so many cracks and creases that it looked like a piece of paper that had been crumpled up and then unfolded again. His cheeks drooped slightly below his jaw, and his neck dipped into a loose gizzard that may have been a strong jaw line in his younger years, but had melted like a candle over the decades. Despite being so gaunt, his expression didn't have an ounce of abdication. Crazy old man, but I couldn't be rude. He wanted me to say something. Who are the what jaw draw boys? Is that what you said? What are they, like poachers or something? Angry hillbillies? Get off my lawn, that kind of thing? Draw boys. And ain't nobody know what the Sam Hill they are. A pinch of numbness rippled down my spine. Then I squeezed a fist. That was a ridiculous thing to say. He was just some old man telling stories to a kid. No reason to think anything other than that. I tried to force a laugh, and then the stone figurine in my pocket felt it was suddenly 10 pounds heavier. Oh, hush up, Fred, the lady said. I ain't never heard of no draw boys. They're out there, Fred said. George Wendover knew about 'em. At least he knew enough to stay away from 'em. Who's George Wendover? I said. Old Fred started to speak, but the lady interrupted him. He was some old trapper or hunting guide or something from way back in the day, turn of the century. Kind of well known locally, I guess, in his time. The only thing I know about him is that he loved to prank his customers. Old Fred nodded and smiled. He did. There ain't no doubt about that. I knew him. You didn't know George Wendover. I did for a short time. I was just a little shit, and he was older than I am now. But I knew him for a little while. Fred was no longer looking at me. His gaze had drifted over my head. But he wasn't looking at the ceiling either. He seemed to be looking at nothing at all. Or maybe looking into the past. And he was a prankster, the old man continued. Ain't no denying that. Most of the goys were back then. And he was the king of 'em. Prankster, storyteller. The old man was always the center of attention down there at Morrison Inn, you know, by Buffalo Head. So yeah, I get where you're coming from. But the thing is, when somebody is all jolly good fun, that just means when they're serious, they're serious. And they're seriously serious. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody who's serious is serious, then they're just serious. But if somebody who's a fool is serious, then they're serious. And let me tell you something. When my little friends and I talked about camping out in that area, and he came up and told us about those draw boys, he wasn't joking. You could just see it in his eyes. I imagined it. George Wendover's eyes must have looked like the same way that this old man's did now. Pale blue, like a stove flame, burning through you as they drifted into the distance like a soldier's 1,000-yard stare. Maybe it was nothing. This man could have been as good a storyteller as George Wendover was. This wasn't anything different from the ribbing that any of the other old fogies from work said to me, except for the little figurine that now weighed 1,000 pounds in my pocket. And this man's eyes and the other eyes. You getting anything to eat? I just about jumped out of my skin when Tom came up behind me. Mackie said he's making squirrel fricassee for lunch. And let me tell you, if you thought Mackie's coffee was bad, wait until you taste his cooking. I'm not sure if he uses real squirrel, but he might. I got a snack while Tom paid and made the small talk with the lady. The old man didn't say anything more before we left. On the ride back, I asked Tom if he knew anything about George Wendover. He didn't, and suggested I talk to Mackie if I was interested in the local history. The rest of the crew was packed in the camp when we got back. Most of the guys were in the kitchen area sitting around with muddy coffee and chatting about whatever. A couple were cleaning their guns, and Dutch was sitting in the back corner reading a book. Tom took a seat with the guys in the kitchen. They gave him a hard time about the coffee and then started about the morning activities and that night's battle plan for bagging a big buck. I sunk into a nearby folding chair and tried to keep up with their conversation for a while. That didn't last long. The fire was comfortable. I had spent most of the day in the chilly air, and I had gotten almost no sleep the night before. My mind started to wander, a little to hunting and a little to that old man at the store, before it all melted into that bubbling soup of thoughts that swirl in your head before you fall asleep. Tom woke me up about an hour later. Part of the agreement for free use of the hunting cabin was that everybody had to pitch in with a few chores. A couple of the guys got a ladder and climbed up on the cabin roof to patch a leak. Tom and somebody else went wandering into the woods to fix up some tree stands or something. A couple other guys tried to get me to help them split and stack wood. Give the grunt work to the kid, I guess. To their charging, I opted to go with Mackie to clear a couple downed logs off one of the trails that led back to the road. When we were alone together, I asked him about George Wendover. He was an old hunting guide back in the early part of the century. Kind of well known around these parts. I don't know much about the guy other than he had 1,000 kids. I heard he was kind of a storyteller. Yeah, I guess. I think I remember hearing one time that he liked to pull pranks on city slickers who came up. One time he stuck a porcupine foot in a bear trap, and one of those goofy sumbitches took it home as a souvenir thinking it was a bear paw. Mackie chuckled. Have you ever heard any stories about him or anybody else talking about the Draw Boys? The what? Draw Boys. The hell is that? I don't know. Some kind of like creature or something that lives in the woods around here. Ha! Yeah, that sounds like something old Wendover would try to pull on somebody. He looked at me with a grin on his face. I tried to force a smile and couldn't. I knew it was probably a joke from that old man, but the weird things happening all weekend just made the entire situation too bizarre for me not to feel a little suspicious. Mackie noticed my hesitation right away. No, kid, no way. You don't seriously believe that, do you? He threw his head back and laughed harder than ever. You're fine, kid. If anything was going to get you in these woods, it'd be a bear or a pack of coyotes. Or you'd end up getting goosed by a buck during rut. But you ain't ever going to see no Bigfoot or, what was that Mexican thing called? The chalupa cobra? It sounded as ridiculous as ever when he put it that way. It was nothing at all. That crazy old man from the store was either senile or trying to scare an out-of-towner. The little stone trinket was from a gift shop, and some kid dropped it while hiking. The eyes? Probably raccoons or bears or something. That was all. I was so stupid. I laughed at myself, knowing that I was going to be the brunt of all jokes for the rest of this weekend. Laughter flourished as soon as we got back. Mackie hadn't even put the chainsaw away before he was telling the other guys about it. I took it in stride and tried to find some fun in there, heaping helping of humility. Even Dutch got a little kick out of it. We spent the rest of the afternoon going back and forth between doing chores and hanging out at camp. Well, maybe more hanging out than anything, but we kept busy. 2 o'clock rolled around and everybody started to dress up again. By 2:30, 6 of the 8 guys, myself included, were carrying our rifles into the woods. A couple of those smart alecks offered to let me go with them, so I didn't get scared. I told them to screw themselves. A couple of them did ask in earnest if I wanted to try out another spot. I considered but decided to stick with what I knew. So I trudged into the forest and made my way up the hill to the usual spot. I saw down near where I had hunted from before. Cold air made it hard to sit still. Mackie and his nephew were talking about the snow coming soon. It got even worse in their wilderness than back home downstate. I scanned the woods for any kind of movement, then clapped my hands over my mouth to stifle a yawn. This wasn't good for hunting. You had to be as still and quiet as possible. How could I not yawn, though? I was tired. It was cold, and I had almost no sleep over the last 24 hours. The nap I'd taken earlier felt so good. The woods here were quiet. Maybe I could stave off those yawns if I just closed my eyes for maybe 15 minutes. When I woke up, the giant full moon was peeking at me through the treetops. My first thought was shock and almost a little bit of panic. I didn't mean to sleep so long. I wondered if the other guys were looking for me. The moon wasn't very high yet, so maybe it had only just gotten dark. I hopped up from my spot and started hiking back toward camp. Fortunately, the moonlight was bright enough to let me see where I was going without a flashlight. I paused when I got close to that tree. It towered over everything around it like a giant wooden cathedral. The stone figurine was still in my pocket, and I started fingering it without thinking. Such an odd thing, even without the creepy stories. Then there were those eyes, if even they were eyes, just glowing white discs at the back of that cave. They had to be eyes, unless my own were just playing tricks on me. Climbing down was probably not a good idea. It was late and the other guys would be worried. On the other hand, it would only take a minute, and the curiosity was killing me. If only I could look into that cavern one more time and see what was really in there. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and started to climb down. I leaned against the saplings to keep my balance until it was too steep and I had to face the dirt and had to inch down like a ladder. After a few minutes of working through the obstacles, I made it to the lock of coiled roots suspended under the trunk. I moved a few aside and peered into the hole. Nothing. The space beneath the tree was filled with darkness, as empty as the old man's stories. I started to laugh at myself. I really was just a goofy kid jumping at phantoms. I let the roots fall and was just about to start climbing again when something caught my eye. I moved them aside again and peeked in. This time the orbs were there, the same wide glowing ovals that I'd seen in the same place before. As soon as I looked in, 2 more sets appeared further in the cave on either side. Wow! So there really was something in here after all. At least I'd confirmed it. A few more white dots blinked on farther back. I started to get a little nervous in the pit of my stomach. If these were bear cubs, their mom couldn't be too far. Then it smiled. The darkness below the closest set of eyes peeled back, revealing a huge crescent of teeth. The mouth stretched almost as wide as the eyes and dipped deeply enough for the whole image to look like an umlaut over a U. The teeth looked like daggers, long and sharp like the mouth of a shark, but gnarled and twisted in different directions. They seemed to glow on their own. As no light reached that deep into the cave, the whole face hung in the air like a deranged Cheshire cat. Adrenaline has never surged so fast and hard as it did in that moment. It erupted and set my insides on fire, with a cold sweat oozing down my skin. The stories and stone figures didn't even cross my mind. All I could do was to swear under my breath. They leered at me. 1,000 hours seemed to pass in just a few seconds, and after what happened next, I wished for 1,000 more. The face lunged at me. I saw a cloud of gnashing knives fly down the tunnel. On instinct, I sprang away from the opening, throwing myself with no particular plan on where to go. Gravity made that decision for me. I went ass over tea kettle and tumbled down the hill. The whole way down felt like getting pummeled by a boxer as my body bounced off rocks and branches. Everything whooshed and whirled around me until I gave up on telling ground from air. At one point in my fall, I noticed my rifle sling slipping off my shoulder, and an instant later it had vanished completely. I rolled all the way down to the bottom of the hill and kept going on momentum until colliding with a fallen tree trunk and wrapping myself around in a knot. For the first second, I laid there dazed. In the second, I noticed a million aches and pains. At the third, a stick snapped as something, the things, made a beeline for me through a flurry of leaves. I jumped to my feet and almost went right back down. As I tried to hop over the log, I grabbed a nearby branch to steady my weight, wobbled around the obstacle, and limped into the woods. My whole body ached. It felt like somebody had buried a hatchet in my leg. Everything was still spinning from my tumble down the hill, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't even think. I just had to move. I hobbled like a drunk man. I was almost blind from sensory overload. Behind me, the creatures screeched. Their cries had the cadence of a chipmunk or bird with a tone like a broken speaker on a malfunctioning robot. The sound wrenched my guts, and I tried to pick up the pace. The forest became a mishmash of abstract existence. I ran. They chased me with an orchestra of rustling leaves and their hellish screams. I had no idea where I was anymore. Everything was such a blur that I couldn't have been miles away or only feet from the log. I didn't care or dare to look back. I just had to keep moving, running, hobbling, aching, screeching, those eyes, those teeth. The pain in my leg got worse with each step. Every time I moved, a bolt of angry lightning shot from the middle of my foot up to my hip. It hurt so much, too much. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. I tried to take another step and went down. I landed half-cocked on my shoulder and rolled onto my back. The creatures slowed down and stopped their war cries. There was no point in trying to get back up and run. I had nothing left in me to give. The chase was over, and I was at their mercy. Those giant glowing eyes bounced a little as they walked up to me. I could almost see their outlines in the moonlight. One of them stepped over my torso and leaned closer to my face. It peeled back its lips into that same sickening smile from under the tree. Dear God, it was going to eat me, right then and there. Its mouth was bigger than my entire head, which it could have bitten right off if it wanted to. Its rows of teeth were haggard and gnarled, pointing every which way. I could imagine them ripping and tearing at flesh as it chewed me. I don't know if I'd been screaming the whole time or not, but when it opened its jaws, I howled. The creature smiled wider at that point. A couple of the other ones did the same. Hey, somebody's voice rang out from somewhere off to my right. Hey, kid, is that you? The creature backed off, its smile turned down, and its massive white eyes seemed to dart toward the sound. This was my only chance. Here, the word burst out of me in desperation. If there was any energy left in my body at all, it forced its way out in the most horrified scream that a person could muster. I felt like I was yelling a hurricane into existence. Here, I'm over here, 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 here. A flashlight beam washed over us, and I saw them. They looked like the stone figurine I had found, but only in the same way that a cartoon drawing of a human looks like us. They were short and thick, with rough, blemished skin that looked like their entire bodies were made from calluses hung on a frame. They had all the human features, but every one of them was wrong. Appendages were too long or too short or slightly off from where they should be. Their heads were squarish looking, as big as a normal person's midriff, with eyes like footballs and mouths like sharks. The whole group of them spun to face the source of the light. The one closest to me looked shocked, an expression all too human for such an abomination to have. They all looked shocked. They froze and stared. A few yards away, whichever one of the guys had found us sputtered a string of swear words a mile long. One of the creatures opened its mouth and let out a terrible cry. It only lasted for a second before being drowned out by the explosion of gunfire. They scattered. The whole group of them darted back the way they came in a flurry of loose leaves. The light quivered a little, and a moment later the rifle reported another shot. One of the creatures cried out in the distance. A moment later, they were quiet. Dutch jogged over and kneeled down next to me. Kid, I didn't even know. Are you okay? I wanted to sob, but I was too tired. Instead, I craned my neck to look at the moon, now cresting the treetops. It was pretty that night. Half an hour later, I was laying in a bed in camp with a warm cloth on my forehead. One of the other guys, who I did not know, was a volunteer firefighter. After he deemed me capable of walking, he and Tom helped me back to the cabin. They helped me take off my outer layer, gave me a glass of water, and helped me into the bed while the firefighter guy examined my bumps and bruises. So what happened exactly, Tom said. Dutch and I locked eyes. I shook my head and took a sip of water. He got attacked by some kind of animal, I guess. I couldn't tell exactly what they were, but they had big eyes. Bear cubs, maybe? Nah, a cub won't go after a person, Mackie said. Coyotes, probably. I don't know. I didn't see them very well, Dutch said. Probably, yeah, coyotes, I guess. Mackie looked at me. Why didn't you shoot at him, kid? I lost my gun while I was rolling down the hill. I croaked. My voice came out way more hoarse than I expected. Tom's face dropped like he had seen a ghost. Is that what happened? Them coyotes came up on you, you fell down the hill and dropped your gun on the way down, and then they chased you even more? I nodded. That was basically what happened, except for the coyotes being, well, something else. Sorry, kid, Tom shook his head. Maybe we should take him to a hospital. Nearest hospital's all the way up in Boonville, I think, Mackie said. Might be one in Old Forge, but I don't know. I looked up at him. Home. What, kid? I just want to go home. Tom put his hand on my shoulder. That's fair, kid. Just rest up for the night, and first thing in the morning, Well, I'll take him right now, Dutch said. Everybody turned to see that he was already half packed anyway. I nodded, sipped my water, and said, yeah. Well, he finished getting ready. A couple of the other guys packed my stuff for me. Tom promised to find my rifle in the morning. 15 minutes later, the whole cabin helped me out to Dutch's car. They told me goodbye, and we were off. Less than a half hour had passed since the darkness smiled at me, and we were on the road, headed home. Dutch floored it to get out of there. We bounced around like pinballs as the little car drove over a trail that it had no business driving on. I didn't care. It was nothing compared to my adventure down that hill. We turned onto a side road, then pavement, drove past the Forestport sign and the little store, and turned onto that tiny country road, masquerading as a major route. As soon as that route hit New York State Route 12, Dutch floored the gas and didn't let up until we passed Utica. We sat in silence for a long time until he pulled over beside a farmer's field somewhere this side of the city. Kid, I sat up in my seat, having been dozing off. We both know those weren't coyotes out there, Dutch said. He turned his head to look at me. In the glow of the dashboard, I could see tears running down his cheeks. What the hell were they? I rested my forehead against the window and looked up at the moon. Now, at its full zenith, I don't know. That was a lie, I knew, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. I took a couple extra days off from work to sit around and do nothing. When I finally went back, it was hard. Tom returned the rifle and apologized. I think he may have felt a little responsible for my spill down the hill, being the one who told me to go up there in the first place. The other guys noticed and were sympathetic at first, but when I was still depressed for a few days later, they started in with ball breaking again. Just being around them brought me back to that night, so a couple weeks later I put in my notice and moved on. I got a job at a gas station in the middle of the city. It paid a fraction of what the plant did, but it was enough to afford an apartment in an area as far removed from any woods as possible. Sometime later I ran into Tom as he came to fill up at my place. He gave me the unfortunate news that Dutch had left the plant soon after I did, and a few months later hanged himself. It hurt to hear that. He had always been so quiet that I wonder if he didn't have some depression issues beforehand. But deep down inside, I had to wonder if those horrible faces he'd seen that night might have haunted him way too much. This whole episode happened years ago. I'm married now with 2 children. We have lived the lives of city slickers, thanks in no small part to my effort. I couldn't stay away from the woods forever, though. Recently, my wife insisted on taking the kids to some fairy tale themed water park upstate. I didn't want to. She put her foot down, so we piled the family in the car and cruised up State Route 12 until it turned into the dinky country road called State Route 28. I started to shake the further we got from civilization and almost threw up as we drove through the village of Forestport. But I pressed on in silence. Our destination wasn't very far away. I tried to make the most of that amusement park. My wife noticed that something was wrong. I choked up and started feeling sick and let her know I just wasn't feeling well, which was the perfect excuse to get out of an evening's festivities. They went to walk the town, and as soon as they were gone, I jumped up in the car and took off. First stop was a liquor store. Then I cruised a few minutes out of town until I was surrounded by forest. I pulled over and stood at the edge of the woods. It was a huge, dark, and easy place for secrets. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secret of my own that I'd smuggled along, a stone figurine carved like an Indian totem pole. I pulled my arm back and pitched it as hard as I could into the forest. I never heard it land. I got in the car, drove back to the hotel, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and tried to forget about the draw boys. Well, guys, that was the story. I hope that you enjoyed it. And again, thanks for listening.
All right, folks. There's another reading from Dee Dee. Great job, Dee Dee. Okay, in a minute I'm going to go to panel. Let's see if there's any comments here. Everyone says, great job, Dee Dee, great job. Okay, folks, just to let you know, there's going to be some changes in my format. I'm going to start doing more of my old style pre-recorded shows because I have to go out and do some driving to make some money. I'm falling behind, had to tap into some savings and that kind of thing. So I'm going to start driving more. I'm not sure because there'll still be live shows, and I'm going to start doing that late night Sasquatch talk now and then. That'll be kind of off the cuff, not scheduled. Shows will still be Tuesday and Friday nights at 8 Central Time. And that's until I get some more patrons on my Patreon, which you can find the link somewhere. I think it's in my description. And you can actually use the link right there below the chat, which is where over here. It looks like a little dollar sign down there if you want to donate directly to the show and support it. Until I start getting some more support for the show, I'm going to have to back off and doing these live shows. So here in a minute, I'm going to go to panel and see if anyone has to say. If any of you all have some comments, go ahead and put them there in the chat. Okay, y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do y'all think of that encounter story by Dee Dee? First of all, you ever heard of a Genoskwa?
Well, yeah, I've got half of the story because I was driving home, but we were talking about it not too long ago too. I have to tell you, that would freak me out.
Yeah, I've heard a Genoskwa, and the description I've heard wasn't quite that. It was pretty close, except for the shark-like teeth and the, I guess, the glowing football-shaped eyes. They were just Bigfoots, really, but they do have the calloused skin and that kind of thing. And I guess it's from rolling in the dirt or whatever on the rocks, for whatever reason. And then they're supposed to be the most vicious of all of the Sasquatch. I guess from inbreeding or something, they're just kind of crazy. So
I don't want to encounter one.
yeah. What about you, Ralph? Dee Dee? Oh, Dee Dee.
Hello.
Hello. You there, Ralph?
Hey, Ralph.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, Darcy, Dee Dee, Rick.
Hey, Ralph.
Yeah, I would not want to get anywhere.
Yeah, regular Genoskwas, I understand, are pretty vicious and crazy. And a Genoskwa with shark-like teeth, oh yeah. I don't think I'd want to have that thing coming after me either.
You think it's from the inbreeding, though, Rick?
Well, as I understand it, the Genoskwa are mainly in southeast Texas. And they're kind of they're landlocked, not landlocked, but they can't get away because there's cities all around them. They're living in one forested area. And that makes them crazy because they're, what am I trying to say? The genetic pool isn't that big, you know? So yeah,
Right.
a lot of inbreeding, a lot of nutso going on there. Hey, Amy.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Big T.
Hey, Teresa. So what'd you think of the story, Amy?
I liked it. A lot to think about. I don't know a lot about Genoskwa. I haven't read a lot about them, really.
How you doing, mate?
Hey, Lane.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Well,
Teresa, your mic is muted. Oh, I see why.
Hey, Amy, I have to apologize. I didn't get to make it up here for the.
for the spaghetti.
Yeah,
Well, maybe next time.
Well, Kyle, if you want to say hi with your voice, then you can go to Discord. The link is down here and in the description. Join Discord, and you can come in here and chat with everybody.
What year did this take place?
Dee Dee?
Actually, they didn't say. He just said it was a few years ago, but he didn't say what year. So, and he posted it 1 year ago.
Did he say where it was at? I missed it if he did.
Forestport, New York. It's upstate New York.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where is it? Wow, my video is really delayed. And Discord link is over here and in the description. My job, I never lost my job with Uber. I don't know what you mean, Robert. You want me to replay the soldier's deathbed confession? Yeah, I might do that when I do a late Squatch talk again. But I'm getting ready to post the entire thing as a full show. I'm reading chat, people. Go ahead if you have something to say. Where the heck is my mouse? Oh, there it is. There you go, Teresa. I had you muted on there. Well, it sounds like Barry. It sounds like subterranean Bigfoot or man-eaters by the sound of that story, doesn't it? Seem to be living going through a hole in a tree into an underground nest of some kind, because it was on the side of a mountain, if I was understanding correctly. Does that sound right, Dee Dee? Can you all hear me, Dee Dee?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
I can hear you. I was wanting to know where this took place.
Dee Dee?
I think she said upstate New York, right?
Oh, Dee Dee's in chat. Forestport, New York is what she said.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Genoskwa seems to be a tough subject to talk about. There's very little out there about Genoskwa. There's some a few stories here and there and some description that doesn't seem to match your typical Sasquatch. So unless if anybody in chat have any more questions, otherwise I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. It's been over an hour now.
Is it a type of dog, man?
As I understand, it's a type of Bigfoot. They're just suffering from inbreeding, and it causes all kinds of weird deformities in them, and I guess a little insanity. Yeah, Dee Dee said they're also called stone men because their skin is so calloused they look like stone. Hello, Ivan. You're just in time for me to end the show, actually. Does anyone have any more questions in chat on the YouTube side? Okay, well, again, people, please visit my Patreon. Every little bit helps, and you can always use the super chat down below underneath the chat window there. It looks like a little dollar sign to donate whatever directly. And there are some benefits in the chat too. I don't really know exactly what it is, but like your chat pops to the top, you're highlighted. I don't know. I don't understand why it does that. But I haven't been able to see the full extent of what Super Chat does because nobody's used it yet. So if there are no other questions, how about you people in panel? Any questions or comments?
Well, I missed your show, Rick. I just buzzed in. I was watching the presidential thing and walked in here and my tablet was beeping. And so I'm going to have to go back and watch your show.
What presidential thing?
The president addressed the United States tonight on the border security on the southern border. And it was a piss fest between the Democrats, Pelosi and Schumer and him, and just same old bullshit. But I think it's getting down to where he might even use an executive order to get that wall built.
That bastard cutting into my airtime. All right, folks, until next time, y'all take it easy.
Thanks, everybody.